Enderby Island lies at the northern edge of New Zealand's Auckland Islands, set in the cold Southern Ocean several hundred kilometers south of the mainland. The island is low and rounded, formed by ancient volcanic activity and shaped by persistent wind and rain. Peat soils cover much of the ground. Grasses, herbs, and mega-herbs grow densely in the brief summer season. There are no trees except for a small patch of wind-twisted rata on sheltered slopes. The climate is maritime and changeable. Cloud cover moves quickly. Light shifts between mist and pale sun. Westerly winds arrive with little warning and often carry salt spray. Temperatures remain cool throughout the year, rarely reaching extremes of heat or cold, yet seldom offering warmth. Rain falls frequently, feeding bogs and small streams that cross the island toward rocky shores. Wildlife is more common than people. Seabirds nest in large numbers, and marine mammals haul out along beaches. Human visits have always been infrequent, limited to sealing, scientific parties, and occasional castaways. For long periods, the island sits without witnesses, surrounded by open water and distance. Silence often defines these shores, where weather and wildlife set the only rhythms through most of the year. The vessel involved was the Derry Castle, an iron bark engaged in long-distance trade during the late 19th century. Such ships connected colonial ports with European markets, carrying bulk cargoes that moved slowly but efficiently across the world's oceans. Records indicate the Derry Castle had departed from Australia, loaded primarily with grain, and was bound for Britain. The route required rounding the southern latitudes where strong westerly winds could hasten passage but also increased navigational risk. The crew was composed of professional sailors accustomed to extended voyages. Merchant seamen of this period often came from varied maritime backgrounds, moving between ships as contracts allowed. Their work was structured by watches, maintenance, and strict hierarchy under the captain and officers. Survival training as understood today did not exist, yet practical seamanship required competence with sails, hull work, rationing, and emergency response. Many sailors were familiar with hardship at sea, though few expected to rely on land for survival in sub-Antarctic regions. The late 1800s were a period when the Auckland Islands were already known to mariners as hazardous. Charts marked the area, but precision navigation remained difficult. Cloud cover, currents, and imperfect chronometers could all affect a ship's true position. For this reason, the New Zealand government had established castaway depots across parts of the sub-Antarctic islands. These depots stored food, clothing, tools, and sometimes small boats, intended specifically for shipwreck survivors. Their presence acknowledged that wrecks in the region were not rare. Despite this knowledge, most crews did not expect to use such depots. Voyages were planned for open sea efficiency, not coastal approaches near remote islands. The Derry Castle's officers would have relied on dead reckoning, celestial navigation, and prevailing winds to maintain course. Small miscalculations, if combined with weather or current, could place a ship closer to land than intended. Historical sources differ on some navigational details, and complete logs from the final days are limited, leaving certain specifics uncertain. What is clear is that the voyage itself was routine in purpose. Grain transport was commercial, not exploratory. The men aboard were working sailors engaged in a normal passage through a known but demanding part of the world. Nothing in the ship's mission suggested prolonged contact with land. The expectation was transit, not arrival. Enderby Island lay along their path only as a hazard on charts, not as a destination. Enderby Island lay along their path only as a hazard on charts, not as a destination. As the Derry Castle entered the Southern Ocean latitudes near the Auckland Islands in March 1887, conditions were typical for the region: strong winds, cold air, and long swells moving under persistent cloud. Exact weather details on the final approach are not fully recorded, but contemporary accounts confirm limited visibility and heavy seas in the area around the time of the wreck. On March 20, 1887, the voyage changed course from routine to irreversible. The ship came too close to the Auckland Islands group. Whether through current drift, navigational error, or weather influence is not fully certain in surviving records. What is documented is the outcome: the Derry Castle struck rocks off Enderby Island. Iron hulls could survive strain, but not repeated impact against sub-Antarctic reefs. The contact with rock opened the vessel to the sea. Water entered the hull. Damage progressed quickly. A grain-laden bark, once breached, became difficult to control. Cargo could shift. Pumps could be overwhelmed. Survival at that stage depended on immediate action and proximity to land. The crew attempted to abandon the vessel. Lifeboat use in such waters carried its own risks. Cold temperatures, surf, and rocky shorelines reduced margins for error. Some men made it to land. Others did not. Exact numbers vary slightly among sources, but fatalities occurred during the wreck and landing. By the time the survivors stood on Enderby Island's shore, the separation from the ship was final. Supplies left aboard were largely lost. The island was not inhabited. No settlement waited beyond the dunes and scrub. The men who reached land were alive, but without transport, and with only what they had managed to carry or salvage. The voyage had ended. Isolation had begun. But the first days were governed less by reflection than by immediate needs. The survivors gathered along the shore where wreckage sometimes drifted in. Sub-Antarctic currents often returned fragments of ships to land. Timber, spars, and loose materials became the first resources. These pieces allowed the men to think beyond the next hour. Enderby Island was not unknown to maritime history. Previous castaways had left traces, and the wider Auckland Islands had, in earlier decades, hosted short-lived settlements and depots. The survivors did not initially know what might still exist, but they understood that other shipwrecked sailors had endured here before. That knowledge shaped their decisions. Shelter came first. Exposure in that climate could weaken men quickly. The island's weather remained cold, wet, and changeable. Wind rarely stopped. Using salvaged wood and canvas where available, they formed crude structures above the high tide line. Natural hollows and scrub provided some windbreak. The shelters were functional, not comfortable. Their purpose was to reduce heat loss and provide a dry space when rain persisted. Food defined the next stage of routine. Enderby Island supported wildlife common to the sub-Antarctic: seabirds, seals in certain seasons, and edible plant life such as roots and greens known to earlier castaways. The men hunted what they could catch and gathered what they could identify. Accounts from the period described castaways in the Auckland Islands region relying on birds and seal meat. Preparation methods were simple. Fires were maintained when fuel allowed. Driftwood and scrub served as fuel sources, though both required effort to collect. Water sources existed on the island in the form of streams and rain collection. Fresh water reduced one major risk, allowing them to focus on calories and shelter maintenance. Even so, malnutrition remained a concern. Diets built on limited wild sources lacked variety. Energy expenditure often exceeded intake, especially in cold conditions. Routine gradually replaced urgency. Men organized tasks. Some focused on foraging. Others maintained shelter and fire. A watch for passing ships became part of daily life. Elevated points on the island offered views of the sea lanes, though traffic in those waters was sparse. Signaling methods were simple: smoke by day, fire by night when fuel allowed. Clothing posed another challenge. Garments worn during the wreck deteriorated under constant dampness. Drying clothes near fire helped but also wore fabric thin. Protection from wind mattered as much as warmth. Sailcloth and recovered materials were reused when possible. Time on the island did not pass evenly. Days were measured by weather and by the success of food gathering. Periods of storm forced men into shelter for long stretches. During such times, activity narrowed to maintaining fire and rationing what food remained. Silence often replaced conversation. Energy conservation became practical, not philosophical. Leadership structures among survivors are not fully detailed in all records, but maritime crews typically retain some hierarchy after wrecks. Order improved chances of survival. Shared labor reduced individual strain. Disputes, when they occurred, are sparsely documented, but the environment itself discouraged wasted effort. The men also searched for any existing depots left from earlier rescue initiatives in the Auckland Islands. In previous decades, authorities had placed castaway depots in parts of the island group. Whether supplies remained intact or accessible varied by location and time. Exploration carried risk but also the possibility of tools or food. Such searches were undertaken cautiously. Health changed slowly. Weight loss became visible over weeks. Minor injuries healed more slowly in cold conditions. Salt exposure, dampness, and limited diet affected skin and strength. Still, as long as routine held, survival remained possible. What marked this phase was not drama but repetition. Gather fuel. Check water. Hunt birds. Scan the horizon. Repair shelter. Repeat the next day. Survival depended on continuing these tasks without interruption. Hope did not take the form of optimism. It existed as procedure. Each completed task extended time. Each day alive preserved the possibility of rescue. The island did not become friendlier. The men simply learned its limits and worked within them. Weeks on Enderby Island accumulated without clear markers. The men could track days at first, but weather blurred sequence. Storms arrived in long bands. Low cloud covered the horizon. Visibility often narrowed to the near shoreline. During such periods, watching for ships became symbolic rather than practical. Physical decline followed predictable patterns. Calorie intake remained uncertain. Hunting success varied. Seabirds could not always be caught in needed numbers. Seal presence fluctuated with season and location. When catches were poor, rations tightened. Men reduced movement to conserve energy. Weakness appeared gradually, then uniformly. Exposure added another layer. Constant dampness affected skin and joints. Boots and clothing degraded further. Some survivors likely experienced swelling in feet and hands, common in prolonged cold and wet conditions. Small cuts risked infection. Medical supplies from the ship had been largely lost in the wreck. Psychological strain increased quietly. Isolation limited external reference points. The same coastline, the same routines, the same gray sky repeated. Historical accounts from castaways in the Auckland Islands region describe monotony as a weight equal to hunger. Men spoke less. Silence became functional. It preserved energy and avoided conflict. Attempts to improve their situation continued. Some men explored farther across the island to locate better resources or signs of depots. Travel across Enderby's terrain was not simple. The ground was uneven and often waterlogged. Slips and falls were risks, especially for weakened bodies. Exploration had to be balanced against the energy cost. Weather occasionally destroyed progress. Shelters required repair after heavy wind. Fires went out in rain. Restarting them demanded dry tinder, which was not always available. A lost fire meant cold meals and lower morale until flame returned. Records from similar sub-Antarctic survivals note that men often began to show signs of nutrient deficiency after extended periods. Fatigue deepened. Tasks took longer. Recovery after exertion slowed. Even carrying driftwood could become taxing. The group also faced uncertainty about rescue likelihood. The Derry Castle had been expected at ports. Its absence would eventually be noticed, but search efforts in that era were limited and slow. Survivors could not know when, or if, a ship might deliberately look for them. Their signals depended on chance sightings. Deaths among Auckland Islands castaways were historically common, though specific accounts from the Derry Castle survivors indicate that several endured the full period. Any illnesses or losses that occurred were recorded sparingly in maritime reports. Where records are unclear, historians note only that survival came at physical cost. What is known is that by the later phase of their stay, the men were thinner, slower, and deeply weathered. Their labor focused on essentials only. No energy remained for improvement beyond necessity. Time stretched. The island remained unchanged. The men adapted as far as adaptation allowed. Survival continued, but the margin narrowed. Rescue did not arrive quickly, and it did not arrive with ceremony. Like many maritime survivals of the 19th century, the end came through routine navigation rather than targeted search. In 1887, months after the wreck of the Derry Castle, a passing vessel operating in the Auckland Islands region approached Enderby Island. Ships occasionally called near these islands for sealing, surveying, or refuge from weather. Such visits were infrequent but not unknown. When the vessel neared, the survivors recognized the opportunity immediately. Signal fires, long maintained as a precaution, became essential. Smoke was the most visible sign they could produce. Men moved to the shoreline despite weakness. Any fabric or reflective object from the wreck was used to attract attention. Historical reports indicate that the castaways were eventually sighted and taken aboard. Exact details of the first contact are sparsely documented, but maritime records confirm their recovery after approximately 3 months of isolation. Their physical state was consistent with prolonged exposure. Survivors were undernourished and worn. Skin showed the effects of cold and salt. Clothing was reduced to what could be repaired or repurposed from wreckage. Strength returned slowly once aboard ship, aided by regular food and dry quarters. There was no recorded celebration. Maritime rescues in that era were handled as practical matters. A crew in distress was assisted, documented, and transported onward. Survival was noted in logs, not dramatized. The men left Enderby Island behind without ceremony. The shelters they built remained. Fire sites cooled. The island returned to its usual silence. The Derry Castle itself did not leave the same quiet trace. Wreckage scattered along the coast served as a reminder to later visitors of how ships could end in those waters. The Auckland Islands already had a reputation for wrecks. This incident added to that record. For the survivors, the conclusion was simple. They had endured long enough to be found. No further meaning was required at the time. Recovery was a return to routine life at sea or ashore, depending on each man's path afterward. Their names appear in shipping records and survivor lists, but few personal accounts survive. The event remained part of maritime history rather than popular memory. The rescue closed the immediate ordeal. It did not erase the months that preceded it. The survival of the Derry Castle castaways stands as a measured example of endurance shaped by discipline rather than drama. Their experience did not alter the Auckland Islands, nor did it change the risks of southern navigation. It simply added another record to a region already known for maritime loss. 19th-century sealing and trade pushed ships into remote waters where charts were incomplete and weather decisive. Many crews accepted these conditions as part of their livelihood. Survival, when it occurred, depended less on heroics and more on routine decisions made carefully over time. On Enderby Island, the men lived within the limits imposed by climate, terrain, and supplies. They adapted where they could and endured where they could not. Their methods, rationing, shelter building, observation, reflect practices common among experienced sailors facing isolation. The island remained unchanged after their departure. Wind, seabirds, and surf continued without reference to human presence. Such places do not record suffering, they outlast it. What remains is the documentation. Logbooks, wreck reports, and survivor notes preserve the outline of events. They show that survival often emerges from ordinary actions repeated consistently under pressure. The story ends without spectacle. A wreck occurred. Men adapted. A ship arrived. Life resumed elsewhere. The silence of the island is the final context in which their survival is understood.